All right, I think that's our cue. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashish Jadwania. I am a former program director, 2 months out, vice chair of education at Northwestern University in Chicago, and one of the AAIM counselors. Co-hosting with me today is Amit Pawa. Amit, want to say a quick hello?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us. I'm with Pawa. I am one of the CDIM counselors, and at Hopkins, I'm one of the sub-internship directors.
Thanks, Amit. So this is a webinar on program signaling, a very low stress topic. And our subtitle here, Anticipated Residency Program Usage and Student Advising. Learning objectives, we're going to learn the background and evolution of program signals, and learn what advice students are already receiving on program signaling, understand how residency programs plan to use the new signaling structure. But really, it's this last one with more unknowns than knowns. We're going to discuss questions on all of these objectives, as well as geographic preferences, the impact on IMGs, couples, and I'm sure more topics will come up. For the agenda, we're going to do a quick round of introductions. I'll be introducing our panelists. I'll hand things over to our council presidents from AAIM and CDIM. I'll introduce them in a second for a brief background. The meat of our hour is going to be a moderated panel discussion with clerkship directors, program directors, and cover the topics as mentioned. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. We're going to ask that you put them in the chat. We're going to do our best, Amit and I, along with some of our panelists, to be combing the chat for your questions. And we're going to use the time towards the end of the hour, somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes, to try to answer your questions. And what we can't answer now, we'll to provide some summaries through the AIM listservs afterwards. And then we'll do some closing remarks. So we've got a wonderful group of educators from across the country. Two of our leaders, Dr. Catherine Appelou and Dr. Cindy Lai, are AAIM and CDIM presidents, respectively. Dr. Deb Bynum from UNC, program director. Oh, thank you for waving. If you don't mind waving so people can see your face, they'll hear from you shortly. Dr. Nanette Dendy, clerkship director at Vanderbilt. Dr. Simranjot Jossel, PD at UCSD. Dr. Emily Mullen, PD at Cone Health. Dr. Hillary Ryder, program director at Texas Health. And Dr. Claire Savov, clerkship director at The Ohio State. I and Amit already introduced ourselves. I want to acknowledge, and you can see her Zoom screen there, Dr. Sheila Costa, who does a lot with AIM as a senior director and organizes the webinar series. And last but not least, Dr. Polly Parsons, president and CEO of AAIM, who's supported this effort. Okay, this disclaimer is really important. We all know that program signaling has evolved, and it's rooted in a desire to curb application inflation. There's some evidence you're going to hear in a few minutes. It's limited, but it's what we have to help us understand this evolution. The discussion today reflects a mix of clerkship directors, community, and university program directors. Their comments are their own, do not reflect any rules or regulations of AIMS or others. And I want to thank our panelists for sharing their perspectives, knowing that a lot of their perspectives are still anticipatory. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Appelou and Dr. Lai for a brief background on this. And I got the slides, so just tell me when you want me to go next.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ashish.
Cindy.
I've had the privilege to co-chair this amazing work group with Catherine Appelou. And this work group has been focused on trying to optimize the residency application process. As you can see, we have a really wonderful list of members from all of our AIM organizations who have contributed this work since we first convened early in this year. Our motto is right applicant for the right program for the right reason. Next slide. We want to thank many of our external stakeholders for sharing some of the data that we will be sharing with you in just a bit. And this includes Thalamus, ARIS, AAMC, and RMP, as well as other stakeholders. You may recall that in the end of last year, AIM put out a consensus statement that generated a lot of good discussion. And this statement proposed several changes to the residency application process. This included increasing the number of program signals to 15, including 3 golds and 12 silver signals, so implementing tiered signaling. The statement also encouraged residencies for more transparency. So in other words, to share information about how they're screening the files, and also encouraging residencies to provide more data on how they're selecting applicants so that applicants can assess their alignment with the programs. And then finally, the last recommendation was to really review the interview process, and a recommendation was made to set a cap of 15 interviews per applicant. Our work group has created some short-term as well as long-term goals. Today, we're going to be focusing on discussing signaling as well as transparency of data to be provided to our applicants. And then in a long-term goal is to analyze the interview process as a whole. Next slide. So now Catherine will go through some of the data around interview distribution that will help explain the move towards tiered signaling.
Thank you, Cindy. So we know that the signaling was set up for 2 reasons. Number one is to allow the potential applicants to express their interest in specific programs, and also allow programs to be able to select people who've expressed an interest in them. So that's the background. The data we have on signaling for internal medicine is only 2 years old. We're still early, but we do have some data that is encouraging. So if we look at our data from 23 and year 2023 and 2024, where we had seven signals for medicine, clearly and substantially, people who signal programs are more likely to get an interview invite than someone who doesn't. 36% versus 6% for the general trend. And it was sustained between the last 2 years, 23 and 24. So then the question will be, if this is how it is, then why are we changing our signals? Number one is, when we looked at the data in greater detail, we found out that 25% of the programs, 25% of the signals are going to only 10% of programs, which means some programs have a concentrated number of signals, and some smaller programs may not be getting any signals at all. So looking at other specialties, what have they done to improve their ability to have more programs get enough signals so that they can also share their preferences? And what they had done was go to larger signal numbers and use tiered signaling. So I'm going to show you anesthesia. Next slide, please. So anesthesia did something similar to us. They started with 5 signals. As you can see, same thing, distinguishing between those who signaled getting interviews and those who did not. Then when they went to tier signaling, this is what is interesting. So gold signals, which is the green, had the highest interview conversion rate, followed by silver. And then for those who did not signal at all, it was almost went down to almost 0. So that's what we are predicting for internal medicine. We're hoping that with the tiered signaling of 3 gold and 12 silver, a lot more programs will now have access to some form of signals that will enable them to pick the appropriate applicants for themselves. So that's our prediction. That hasn't happened yet. So that is our prediction for. So why are we continuing with signaling? Next slide. So if you look at applicants, and the average number, or this is data from Thalamus and ARIS, combined from their scheduling data. So the average program gets about 3,000 applications for interview. Let's look at it from the applicant side. The applicants actually get an average of 5 interview invites. It's the extremes that get 15 or more, looking at the data that's clearly displayed here. So if they're getting 5 each, and we are getting 3,000. We needed to be able to shrink down the numbers to those who are really interested in us, and hence the signaling, program signaling. Next slide. So in summary, what we know now is, number one is people who signal have higher interview rates. That's really clearly shown in all specialties, not only internal medicine. Number two is gold signals boosted the most. That's the top preference. And silver also follows. And then people who are non-signalers, it's not zero. It doesn't mean you won't get it, but your chances of getting into invites are much, much less. What does tiered signaling add to it? It allows us to distribute signals more evenly and allows greater flexibility for the applicants in choosing their topmost preferred and others that they would like to go to. Of note, there's considerable variation between programs and how we are using it. So you will see that our diagrams went from maybe 30% all the way up to 55%. So programs are deciding on how they're using this very variably, and we don't actually know the details yet. The good news is that specialties that have changed their approach from small, like ours 7, to large or 2 tiers, have witnessed a greater shift in the balance in which gold will get you more interviews, silver next, and then if you don't signal, the programs are using it less to invite people to interview. So that's what we know now, and that's the data that we have to share. Hopefully in another year, we'll have more information to share with you. Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you, Cindy and Catherine. Okay, I'm going to hand things over to Amit for our first question for our panel, and I'll repeat to our audience, if you have questions that are coming up, please put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them in the last 10-15 minutes. Amit.
Thank you, Ashish. So I just want to take a moment for Dr. Savav and Dr. Ndendi to introduce themselves so that people know who they are, and then we'll get into the questions. They are representing our awesome UME panelists today. Dr. Savav, you want to go first?
Sure. Hello. I'm Claire Savav. I'm a med-peds hospitalist at Ohio State and Nationwide Children's. And I'm actually technically not the clerkship director, but I am in charge of advising for all of our fourth-year students applying in internal medicine, and have been in that position for several years. So all of the data is you know, we're looking at everything that we can. And I think, you know, while the programs this year don't exactly know how they're going to use signaling yet, as advisors, we know that we're already advising students. So I will stop and let Dr. Dundee introduce herself though before I get into it.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Nanette Dindy. I'm the internal medicine clerkship director and also the director of the second year curriculum at Vanderbilt University. And as far as my background, I've actually been a clerkship director for about 7 years, but an academic advisor for about 11 years. So it's been interesting to see the change that has come about with both virtual interviews as well as the use of signals. So I'm excited about this discussion today.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. And before I get into the questions, I do want to say that I appreciate the people that registered that send in questions. We did review them, and we are kind of molding some of our answers to some of those questions. So we appreciate them being asked again. And as you know, an hour is probably not enough time. We could probably do a whole year on this whole topic. So if you don't get your question answered, please don't feel offended. We're trying to make sure that we get to the highest material. And if you feel like your question did not get answered, don't hesitate to reach out to Ashish and I, and maybe we can direct you to a person that can help with that. And also, this is obviously the advice from people. This is not any law or rule written down anywhere, so please take everything as advice from people who may have gone through it more than you have. So the first question that we'll bring up is obviously, you know, signaling is something that is new to internal medicine. You know, we started with just the few signals last few years, and then have now expanded to this increased level. How are you advising students on how to use this, and what changes are you making based on kind of the increased level? And I'll start with Claire first, and then Nanette, you can add in whatever Claire misses or compound her.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been said already that nobody exactly knows how to do this right now. But the way that I have been advising my students is that based on the data from other specialties that have gone to what they call kind of big signaling or large signaling numbers, we really have to look very carefully at the list that they are sending signals to, and I consider it a list within a list, meaning that I expect the majority of their interviews to come from programs that they've signaled, which means that they have to signal very conscientiously, and we really have to look at that list and make sure that, you know, while certainly I'm not going to tell them not to signal, you know, reach programs and dream programs, the majority, so at least 8 or 9, need to be what I call wheelhouse programs, where we really think that they have a good chance of being interviewed if they show interest. You know, I think the big question about gold versus silver signals, I don't know the answer to that. You know, I will say for the program directors on the call, I very much appreciate those of you who have already followed the AIM advice to post on your websites how you anticipate using signals, because, you know, I and my students are paying attention, and that will help inform some of their decisions. So thank you for that. You know, I think it varies by individual and by program, honestly. So for those individuals who are maybe on the more highly competitive side, like I think they should be sending their gold signals to their most competitive programs, whereas students who maybe have a little bit more kind of maybe a red flag or some concern about the application, I want them to use those gold signals for programs that we really think that they would be a good fit for. I'll pause there and let Nanette weigh in.
Well, Claire did such an excellent job. I think I will ditto what she has said. Certainly, I think what has dramatically changed for students is that the number of programs that they need to reasonably apply for has changed. And so in the past, I would often hear students, despite our advisement, would apply to 20, 30, 35 programs with this idea that they're just going to cast a big fishing net and just see what fish come up in it. And then at that point, kind of sift through where they want to interview. That's sort of the mindset that has been in the past. Certainly with virtual interviews, that number kept ticking upward. So I'm actually really excited that we now have the 15 signals personally, because I think it makes it a little bit easier for us when we're advising students about programs. But I think the important thing for every student, and I usually meet with students for a minimum of an hour, often it's 2 or 3 times that we meet over the course of the cycle, is really just be sincere and realistic. Really have to take a little bit of inventory about what your application looks like. But the most important thing is just be really sincere when you're attaching, and now having the 2, the gold and the silver. I think that makes the most sense. We do know, or at least suspect, that those gold ones hopefully are going to give them a little bit of an upper hand, maybe in getting an interview at those places, in particular ones that might be a little bit into reach. And then the silver ones I think are going to be useful, but I don't really know honestly how useful they're going to be in addition to the gold, with the exception of, for the most part, capping most students at applying to 15 programs.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'll just add one more point about the kind of numbers. I think it definitely shrinks the number of programs that I'm advising, you know, strong applicants to apply to, because we do expect so few interviews outside of those programs signaled. Conversely, the students who maybe have, you know, some concerns, I'm actually advising them to apply to even more programs, because if we really are relying on them getting, you know, some interviews potentially from programs that they did not signal, they may need to apply to several more to get even just a few interviews from that number. I will also say, I think and I think this has been coming for the last few years, but the idea of like a safety program where you kind of, throw in a program that, you maybe aren't that interested in, but you feel like you're competitive for, I think that is hopefully going by the wayside a little bit. And I'm really advising students to, look at programs that historically just match people like them, and use their signals there, because just, throwing a signal to a program that you think that you're a shoe-in for, it, if you don't align with their mission, or if that's really not a place that you're interested to train, I think that's something else that I'm trying to shift the mindset on with my students.
Thank you both. And scrolling through the chat, there seems to be a lot of questions regarding or comments about the number increase, going from small digit to a much larger digit. Dr. Appley did put up some information that anesthesia has already kind of expanded a little bit of this. And I know a lot of other programs around the United States outside of medicine also use 15 to 20 signals. Have you talked to any of your colleagues who are advising students in these other programs about how that number has affected their students and how they're approaching things as well? We can start with Dr. Dendy first.
So I haven't necessarily talked to other programs regarding the number that they have had, but I will tell you that the change from moving from 7 to 15, I think really does exactly what Claire mentioned. It takes the pressure to apply to a lot of their safety programs and really to be very concentrated and specific on the programs where they are best qualified for. So typically my recommendation this year has been use your gold signals on, maybe one on that place that is your dream place, but maybe out of reach, but then everything else you need to really be fairly realistic about. So the change from the 7 to the 15, honestly, I think is a positive one, because I think that will make an impact on application inflation. And I think it really just helps the students also to focus on really looking at a program and deciding, does this program fit me enough that I want to use one of my signals on?
Dr. Saval.
Yeah, I agree. I also haven't had a lot of conversation outside of, our own institution. But I think it's the expansion from 7 to 15 kind of moves up some of those decisions on the student's part from, let me just cast my net widely and see what comes in, and then I'll think about where do I want to be, what programs are right for me. Now they need to do some of that, considerations up front. And I think there are some questions that I've seen flying through the chat about geographic preferencing as well. And I think because we know that adding an aligned geographic preference to a program preference signal does boost the yield of that signal. I'm encouraging students, like, can you can you choose between these two regions? If they have 4 regions, it's like you can only go to one residency program. So like, can you choose and try to align more of your signals with your geographic preferencing, since we know that there is some power there now, and we'll get into it later, I believe, but for couples and folks who really have to be willing to go anywhere, then that changes. But
Well, we can actually get into that. So now, how are you guys advising couples? Because obviously this will change both those applying into IM, both as couples, or one in IM and one not in IM.
I certainly have advised them to talk about using their signals for their signals to match. So if they're going to signal one program in one institution, they probably should signal the other program, the other institution. My feeling is that most of our students are not going to get interviews outside of the 15 that they signal. There may be 1 or 2 out there that they will, but otherwise just assume that those 15 are the places that you're going to have the most opportunity to get an interview from, and you're not going to get an interview from all 15. So if you try to split and divide your signals with a couples match, it's going to make that number, I think, smaller for your potential to match in the same location.
Dr. Duania, do we have to move on to the program directors now?
Let's do it.
Okay.
And I got to give a shout out to Gretchen Deemer, past president of AAIM, who's helping with the chat. Thank you, Gretchen. All right, so I'll do what you did, Amit, and I'll have our PDs do a brief introduction. Start with you, Deb Bynum. Dr. Bynum.
Hi, I'm Deb. I'm the program director at UNC, geriatrician and hospitalist. Been PD for about 10 years now.
Thank you. Dr. Jassel.
Hi, I'm Simurjot Jassel. I'm a primary care doctor at the VA in San Diego, and I'm honored to serve as the program director for the UC San Diego Internal Medicine Residency Program. I've been the program director for 10 years, and I was an associate program director for 8 years prior to that.
Thank you, Simurjot. Dr. Ryder.
Hi, Hillary Ryder. I am the founding program director of Texas Health Fort Worth Internal Medicine Residency Program. We are a university-affiliated community-based hospital in Fort Worth, Texas. I have been a program director for 6 years and an associate program director for more than a decade, although I lost track of the number of years. And clinically, I am a hospitalist.
Thank you, Hillary. Dr. Mullen.
Hi, I'm Emily Mullen. I'm the program director at Cone Health, which is in North Carolina. We are a university-affiliated, community-based program as well. I've been program director for 5 years. I think I'm 5 years, and I was associate for 7 before that. And I am a rare bird these days. I do both inpatient and outpatient medicine, but slightly prefer outpatient.
Well, thanks for those introductions. And again, thanks to all the panelists. I've been keeping up with the chat, trying to, and I think we're on it with trying to address some of these questions. And I'll start with what I hope is a swift one, and I'll just invite Deb and Hillary maybe to comment on this one. Using signaling for invitations versus ranking. How are you thinking about using this for ranking at all?
I think we talked a little bit about this before, but given the number of signals, having 15 signals, I have a feeling that most everyone we invite to interview will be somebody who is signaled. So then, therefore, it becomes not really even helpful in the ranking. I have no idea. I feel like just like the clerkship directors talked about, the students really need to know thyself. I think the programs also need to know thyself. And I have no idea how many gold signals we're going to get. So I don't anticipate that's going to be helpful for my program. For other programs, it might be more helpful, but for us, we do not intend on using it. And I just don't see how it's going to be overly helpful, even with the number of signals they have.
So I feel like, we're all going to open ERAS, the program director workstation, and look at what we get, and our plan, like the plan when you go to battle changes at the first skirmish, right? I kind of feel like that's how many of us are going to face this. Last year, I used signals in my filter, and so I reviewed people who had signaled before I reviewed people who hadn't signaled, but I also used, I'm a ERAS filter person, right? So I also looked at geographic preference, Texas connection, make sure their application is complete, right? And signal was one of those pieces. I think this year it really depends on the number of signals that I have. I'm planning on using gold first and then silver to figure out who to interview, but a lot of it depends on how many I get. I don't think that signaling takes the place of academic excellence or fit. The way we use signaling for deciding on an interview is we have an academic score, and then we have what we call a Gestalt score, which is combined the evidence of their core values. We have core values. We're very service-oriented, community-oriented, team-oriented, and so we look for evidence of service and teamwork. We look for evidence of interest in the program, and that's where we put signal last year. It demonstrated increased interest. I have a feeling this year right? We might use that in gold versus silver. Someone who does a gold might get a little bit higher on the interest. And we also do like fit, right? Do we have the kind of things that people want? If someone says they want to do liver transplants, well, we are not a liver transplant center. Probably not going to be great fit for us. If they're like, I really want to do basic science research, we do not do that. So that would be right lower on the fit. And so, again, we use it first in the screening, and then we use it second in an interest level. We don't specifically use it in ranking, although it is part of that level of interest. So it's one of like 8 features that determines how interested they are. But again, I think this year we may not be reviewing anyone who hasn't signaled us at all.
And can I emphasize again, I think, Hillary, your point's so important. A signal does not make up for an application that is not a good fit for the program, right? So that students really need to understand that a signal does not equal an automatic invitation to interview.
And I would say, last year we interviewed 120 people for 15 spots. Last year we got more than 300 signals, and there were people that I interviewed that did not signal me, and actually at least 3 people that we matched last year did not signal me. So, I think my strategy last year was really different. We were all joking on the pre-meet that going from 7 to 15, we're probably going to get about twice the number of signals. If I've got 600 signals, I'm not going to get to the pool of the rest of the people because I can only interview so many people. There's going to be some good people in there. And again, I think interest is really, as a community program, interest in my program is really important. If you really want to be at UT Southwestern and you're a really great candidate, well, then you should totally signal them. Because if you're not interested in my program, you're not going to come to my program. And in the end, I'm looking for the best qualified candidates who want to do what we want to train them to do.
Thank you, Deb and Hillary. I'm going to throw the same question to Simranjot and Emily. And it was, the broad question of how are you planning to use the signals for invitation? And then I asked a bit of a dangerous question about if you're going to be using this for ranking. And I think you both commented on that being a no. We did do a pre-meet. And I'll emphasize the AIM recommendation, which we'll reiterate at the end of this, is to not use signaling for ranking. So with that, Simranjot, and then maybe Emily, comment on how you're seeing signals and using them for invites.
Excellent. Thank you, Ashish. I totally agree with our prior presenters. We're going to use signals to really call our pool of applicants and focus on those who signal us. We think if we're not in the top 15 for an applicant, then the chances that we'll end up on their rank list is low. So I think that we will likely focus on reviewing applicants who signaled us. And again, assuming that we have about twice as many people who signaled us as last year, that will give us a sufficient pool. For some of our tracks that are more focused, for example, our physician scientist training pathway and our primary care pathway, we will look at applicants beyond those who've signaled us just based on our prior match statistics. In our class last year of applicants, only 3 of our entering class of 42 didn't signal us. And so we found that even though we did interview people who didn't signal us, even with only the 7 signals, there were a relatively small proportion who matched with us if they hadn't signaled us. And we don't plan to use the signals for the ranking.
Hi, so I agree with everything the other program director said. I am in a community program, quite a small program surrounded by kind of big academic programs. So we have a very specific mission, and a lot of what we look at in an application is for fit to that mission. And that means that I will still be doing holistic review of applications regardless of signal. We don't use signal for ranking because at that point, people have gone to see a lot of different programs, and what they might have preferred before they had actually interviewed with us might have changed quite significantly. So I don't, both because it's recommended not to, and because I don't think it's really that helpful once you're down to your rank list, I'm not going to use them. Someone in the chat did ask if we're going to weight gold versus silver signals. And I think for a community program, I will weight gold signals very highly because that means that I'm one of their top 3, which for community program is going to be really important. Of course, I will still look through and make sure they're a good fit. Because if you want to be a physician scientist, we do not have that at my program, and they would be a better fit elsewhere. So I think my goal is to only interview people who signal. But it'll be really interesting to see what it looks like the first day I open up Iris and see how many signals I have.
Thank you, Emily. Maybe on that last comment of gold versus silver, Deb, Simmerjoe, Hillary, any comment on gold versus silver? Any distinctions for you?
I think for us, since we don't know how many gold versus signal silver will get, I just can't comment on that at this point.
That's how I feel too. I feel like it's hard to know without knowing how many you're going to get, right?
I'm assuming that we're going to be able to filter on gold and on silver. I think if we can't, then that's going to make them kind of meaningless. So as presuming there are separate filters, it's really easy to have a filter and then just switch out gold, signal, silver, and then see how many. Yeah, I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to create a list that just says gold signal and doesn't have anything else. And I think that's a theme among all of us. We're looking for someone who's interested in us and fits the criteria we're looking for. So, my plan is to run my initial screening filter with gold first, review all of those, then, look for silver. And, I tend to stop once I get about 150 applicants that I think are okay. And I'm kind of balanced with gender and race and ethnicity, and right. I mean, I feel like I've got a diverse group and a sufficient size group, academic diversity as well, and then I just kind of stop, because why throw good time after bad time after good?
Thank you for those responses. I'll knock out a couple quick things from the chat. Even though we're talking about this with some strong opinions of not interviewing people that haven't signaled, there's no cap on interviews. A student can go on more than 15 interviews if they get more than 15 interviews. And then the other one, I think it's already been said, I'll just reiterate it. A signal does not equal an invitation for an interview. And to somebody's comment about students getting upset about that, obviously they're stressed, but all of our responsibilities are to make sure students understand that a signal is not a guaranteed invitation. All right, I'm going to try to tackle with our PDs geographic preferences and couples. And then Amit, I'll turn it back over to you to talk to the clerkship directors and invite them into that piece of the conversation. So maybe Deb and Hillary, comments on geographic preferencing versus program signaling.
So I am at a 750 bed level 1 trauma center. We have renal transplant. We have VA and VV ECMO. We have a large catchment area in North and Northwest Texas. Saying you want to be in the Southeast is not helpful to me, because if you want to be in Florida, you're not coming to Texas. And I will also say we're a pipeline program. So the stated goal, why we came into existence, is to increase the quality of healthcare provided to North Texans. And if you leave and go to California when I'm finished training you, I have not finished my mission. We are very mission driven. So I need people who are going to stay in Texas, preferentially in North Texas. And gee, if you'll stay and join the Texas Health family, that would really help me meet my tenure metrics. So for me, just Southeast is not helpful at all. But what I do love is when they have like, so I mean, I'm a qualitative person over quantitative, right? Like when they have the qualitative stuff and they're like, I really want to be in Texas, right? Then I'm like, oh, great. Okay, thank you. We'll do that, right? Or conversely, when they say, I need to be near a military base, and the nearest military base is 3 hours away, I'm like, well, that may not work for you. So I do think if you're, and I know it goes both ways, right? If you say you really want to be in Texas and then you're applying outside of Texas, everybody's going to see that. But I think most students have a geographic preference, and if they can be more specific about that, that can be very, very helpful in terms of interest, because I think geography is a huge amount of interest for most, everyone but the cream of the crop who are aiming, they're like, Stanford, Yale, who cares, right? I mean, everyone else is kind of wanting to stay closer to home, I think.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit too. I feel like for us, I think it's going to depend on where you are. I did not find the geographic preferences that helpful, because again, where we are in the Southeast, it's so many programs are over here. For us, preference signals were much more indicative. And we actually had several people who had preference signaled us and had no geographic preference who ended up matching with us. So, and that's fine too. And we were advising our students, if you really are looking at a lot of different areas, then it's okay to do no geographic preference and do the signals instead. To me, that was more powerful, but
Thank you, Deb and Hillary. Simmerjot and Emily, any comments on geographic preferencing?
Yeah, I would say similarly for us, the Pacific area is quite large, and there are just so many people who signal Pacific that we were not able to use that in a meaningful way. So we just used the preference signaling for programs.
Yeah, I think similar to Hillary, as a community program, I think it is useful, but I find more useful the significant impact stories, and also a lot of times the comments under geographic section to be more useful. So often they'll say Southeast, and then they'll say, I was born and raised in McLeansville, North Carolina, which is like right north of me. And so I'll be like, oh yes, we will definitely interview you. So if there is a very specific thing, like I put Southeast, but I really mean the DC metro area, put that in there, because that means you're probably not looking at somewhere that's a 5-hour drive from the DC metro area. So, I think it can be important, but I think it's less weighty than some of the other parts of the application.
Thank you. I'm going to stick with the two of you, Simmerjot and Emily, and comments on couples. When you're seeing these applications come in as a couple, are you going to be distinguishing signaling between the two? Are you expecting them to both signal you, or how are you going to handle if there's a difference, one signaled and one didn't? Simmerjot, you want to start?
Absolutely. So for us in San Diego, there are only 3 programs, internal medicine programs in the city. And so we do take a look at, for couples, whether both have signaled us or not, but we also recognize that someone in the couples match could have a partner who matches at one of the other programs in San Diego. But in terms of whether to interview them for our program, we try to look at them separately rather than looking to see if both have signaled us.
Similarly, there's a lot of internal medicine programs in North Carolina, and we have had, if they're a couple both matching into internal medicine, we have had people, one person will match here and one will match, say, at one of our co-programs down the road, and they live in between, and that works out fine. So I don't expect them to both signal us or both be looking to come here. I personally don't have access, as some of my colleagues at bigger centers, to find out if they signaled, like if their partner is anesthesia, if they signaled the anesthesia program, say at UNC, unless I did some really crazy digging trying to figure that out. So with a couples match, I understand very well that they are casting a wide net. And if they signal me, I'm going to give them the same kind of review as I would for anyone who signaled, regardless of that.
Agree with Emily regarding couples who are matching to different specialties.
Thank you, Simmerjot and Emily. Amit, I'm going to turn things over to you and get our clerkship directors back in on this.
Yeah, I think both Dr. Denny and Dr. Savant addressed the couples question, which I think aligns a lot with what our program director says. So that's a win for us in making sure that we're aligned on the UME, GME aspect. But do you guys advise anything differently for the geographic as well that's different from what the program directors are doing? You can go first, Dr. Savant.
I was just going to say it's interesting because the students are, I will say, maybe like getting wise to the fact that everyone's reading what they put under the geographic preferencing. And so now many of them this year are saying, I'm not going to write anything there, because then if I do, then University of Michigan is going to know that I preference this region for Chicago and not for Michigan. So I think for those students who really do have a strong preference within that region, it's helpful to put it in the comments, but I wouldn't be surprised if people pull back on that this year, just from what's being kind of circulated. And then I don't think I don't talk about couples. I don't think I have a lot more to say other than, again, they need to do some of their like soul searching and thinking ahead of time. So, maybe target 2 different metro areas if you're matching into 2 different specialties and you need a lot of options. It really is very dependent on the couple, though, I think.
I've actually learned that one of the first questions I ask is, do you have a geographical preference when I'm doing advising? Because that not only helps me to sort of get an idea of where they want to go, but also narrows down the programs in that geographical area. I will say that most of my students tell me they don't have a geographic preference. And so in that case, it probably works to their advantage and just not to list a geographic preference. Those who really are set on a particular area, then I will advise them to use that. And for instance, I did have a student who was couples matching last year. They both matched in different programs in the state of North Carolina, and that we really talked about so that they both preferenced that geographical area. But otherwise, I find it quite less useful than I think the signals.
There's actually one good question in the chat that I think kind of maybe the program directors don't see as much as you will see from the students, but what if you guys have a student that one is couples matching an IM, but the other is not in a program that's using signals? How are you advising the IM person to use signaling and to work with their partner in that aspect?
We're really proactive about telling our students that if they are couples matching and one couple gets an interview, or one of the couple gets the interview, but the other one does not, to quickly reach out to the program directors and express their interest and why.
Dr. Savov, any different or any things you've seen differently?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think the 15 signals is probably the toughest on people who are couples matching. And again, it depends on what their goals are, but that's where, picking a few areas where they can kind of cluster their signals that their partner is also maybe interested in, or where there are programs that realistically their partner believes, they can match into, can be a useful thing to do.
And I guess one question for the both of you is, we've talked a lot about signaling and how signaling doesn't sometimes get an interview. How do you approach a student that has signaled and has not gotten an interview and really wants to go to that place? Should they reach out? Should they not reach out? We can start with Dr. Savov first.
This is something that we kind of actively discuss every year in our little pool of advisors, but we do advise them to reach out to a program or 2 programs. I think, again, if you read the message boards, like there are people out there advising students to send letters to 10 different programs saying, I'm so interested, I didn't get an interview. So we, if that's their dream school and we think that they actually could do well there, then we do encourage them to reach out and express that to programs. And with variable success, some students do get interviews after those communications, others don't. But we want the students also to feel like they've given it their best shot. I'd never want to have someone come back to me and say, I didn't match where I wanted to because of the advice you gave me. So we do say it's okay to send those letters, but within reason, because once you get above, 1 or 2 programs, then that is that's excessive and they lose any meaning. I'll say that with a caveat that was in the era before we had 15 signaled, but you said the student had already signaled. So I think, if they've already signaled, then I think it's reasonable to send those.
Dr. Denby, anything to add or?
Not much to add to that. I completely agree. I tell them if they're going to reach out, they need a good reason why, and they need to let the program director know why they specifically want to interview there. And then again, I do the same as Claire. That should be a 1 or 2 off, and certainly not even for every student. My concern is that if we started advising every student to reach out to all the programs that they didn't get an interview for, then we're back to this application inflation, and we're back to program directors who cannot answer all of those emails.
Maybe that's an opportunity to see if our 4 PDs on the hot seat have any comments around outreach outside of the ARIS application.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Like, it's what communication from students you guys are okay with and not okay with. I think that's important for them to know.
So I learned how to do a script in Outlook where you can press a button and there's an automatic response and file of the email. And that, yes, Harley showed me. So yes, thank you, Harley. That made my whole responding to students so much easier because I've got, right, everybody gets the exact same response. It all goes into a student communication file. Do I read them? No, I don't really, but they all get a response that says, we review an ERAS, thank you so much, blah, blah. I have another one for after the interview that it doesn't automatically send. I have to actually type something that's a little bit more personal because they're usually then emailing questions. But I mean, I've gotten 7 emails from one applicant already. And I sent the email the first time and I'm like, I got nothing else for you. But I'm probably getting 10 emails a day now asking if they will get an interview. And just that button makes me very happy. It's like the easy button. Boom, 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 boom.
And I'll add, probably, I went through the couples match 30 years ago, so I still have a real soft spot in my heart and probably a little PTSD as well. My husband matched into ophthalmology, and it was a prelim year, and it was a whole hot mess. So if people reach out to me and it's related to a spouse, a partner, a couple, I often will go and really review it. That is just, I guess I just shared that with 300 people, so I'm going to get 1,000 emails now. But but I think this year with the preference signals, if they did not preference signal me this year, then I'm probably not going to necessarily take seriously that they're incredibly interested in my program. I'm going to view it more as they're panicking because they haven't gotten invitations, and now they see me as a safety place to reach out to. So I think it's going to be less helpful this year unless they did preference signal. Or if they are, again, if they preference and they're working with somebody outside of medicine in another department, I think those are the times when you reach out. And I think Keith mentioned that too, for personal reasons, you really need to be in the area, you've preferenced them, and you're a reasonable applicant for the program. I think that's when it's helpful.
Well, listen, I feel like we could do another hour of this, but we got a few more minutes. And I'm going to actually throw a question to Cindy and Catherine. One question was about international medical grads and any comments or updates you have, knowing that they might not be plugged into the same student advising systems we have for our U.S. medical students.
So with regard to the IMGs, we are sharing the AAIM recommendations with InThealth so they can share it with them. We talked to them, InThealth, about organizing a webinar specifically for IMGs because they don't have the advising that our students have. So that's something that is going to be planned so that they can also get all the information that will help them make an informed choice.
Thank you, Catherine. There's a couple comments about collecting stats on this. I don't know if Cindy or Catherine, you have any comments about how we're going to try to capture what's going to happen this cycle.
The data is being collected for everything, and it's actually being broken down into USMD, DOs, first time, not first time, and IMGs. And so next year we'll have more to be able to tease out. But from the early data, there were no differences with respect to site of origin, gender, and all that. All the data that we're showing applies to everyone. But the numbers for couples and the rest was too small to analyze. So maybe we'll have more in the next year. But we are collecting data for all the different subgroups represented in AAIM.
All right, thank you for that. I'm going to reshare our slide deck for Amit and to go through the AIM recommendations, and we'll wrap up. Give me 1 second here.
And as he's bringing it up, I want to thank everyone again for spending their afternoon with us. Again, if you didn't get your question answered, we tried our really best to answer questions in registration and in the chat. But if you didn't feel like you had an answer, please send it to us, and we will be happy to try to figure out who we could best forward that to. So first of all, thanks for all the oh, never mind.
Okay.
Am I thanking the panelists first, or we could? Yeah, thanks for all our panelists. So, give them a round of applause. They're definitely experts in their field and fielded a lot of questions and took a lot of time to prepare for this and met with us on several occasions. So thank you for being here and helping your future colleague or all your colleagues around the United States in this new endeavor that we're taking in internal medicine. All right. So just to reiterate, since this is through AIM, the recommendations that we have. So, we are along the recommendations that, 3 gold and 12 silver program signals. We recommend programs use signals as a sign of interest when allocating interview invitations. And as we mentioned before, that they're not to use these signals for rank list decision making. So only for making sure that the interviews are given. We also recommend that all students should signal programs if interested. And this includes programs where students may have done visiting rotations or even their own medical schools. Just to make sure that there's equity for those that don't have a home program. So making sure that students are still signaling their home program if that's a place that they're interested in it. I know that was addressed in the chat a couple of times. We do recommend that programs explain their planned use of signals on their respective website. And I know that Claire, in her work as an advisor, has actually been collecting some of that, has been very thankful for some of those that she gets and is able to use to give to her students. And then program signals cannot be sent to specific tracks. I know many of you have tracks within your residency programs. Signals are received at the institution level. So that means that even if you have different programs, like primary care versus hospital-based or whatever, they'll still see the same signal information. I think that's it for that slide. And then so program signaling usage in internal medicine does not apply to the geographic stuff. So we talked a little bit about that. Definitely for couples now with more signals, we recommend that they use them together. This does not mean they can't apply to more than 15 programs. I know there is lore around the students that they won't apply outside 15. We're not saying that they can't, but they can. They just cannot signal more out of that. And we talked a lot about that. It increases the likelihood of the interview offer. Many programs will not offer interviews outside of this, as Paula mentioned, that they will not see that if they're in the top 15, then they're not probably going to interview. And then to make sure that they are going to the reach, pursued as a reach and safety programs as well that, kind of Claire mentioned a lot about. And I will end there because we only got 2 more minutes and I don't want to take any more time from people in their afternoon.
Well, thank you all again. All the best in your student advising. We collected some of the questions we didn't quite get to, like prelims. Hopefully they'll be okay. And a few others, like, is there ever going to be a 2-tiered match? So look forward or look out for future AIM webinars. And hopefully we'll see you in Minnesota for the program directors and in New Orleans for everybody. Thanks again to our panelists. You guys were in the hot seat. That was fabulous. Amit, always fun. Everybody, good luck to your students, programs. Good luck to you too. Thank you all. Bye.